What the fuck?
Go f yourself.
It's not like the people who care about this were gonna vote for his gay ass anyway.
LGBTQ plus people on TikTok and elsewhere are sounding off after Pete Buttigieg, an openly gay man, mind you, became the latest Democratic Party politician to throw trans people under a bus, all to advance his political career. Now, later on in this video, we're going to look at reactions to his pathetic new low, and we're also going to talk about this anti-trans strain within the Democratic Party that's starting to actually gain prominence. But first, I do want to discuss the despicable comments that he made about trans people on NPR's Morning Edition, which went viral after the pro-queer news outlet Them shared the quote from his interview, where he says trans athletes in women's sports raise serious fairness issues. Now, after I saw that and condemned his remarks on Twitter, I noticed that there were very specific kinds of people making their way into my mentions to defend him, including conservatives who outright denied the existence of trans people, as well as TERFs who implied that I was being homophobic for criticizing an openly gay man, and there were also some liberals who accused me of taking him out of context. Now, it's not surprising to see conservatives defend him even if he's gay, because they're the first to love bomb liberals who attack trans people almost every single time. We saw the way that Carrie Lake and Ben Shapiro, as well as others, showered Anna Kasparian with praise after she made her dumbass birthing person tweet, and the reason why they do this is to encourage more liberal transphobia and to shift the discourse to the right. But on a more serious note for a moment here, I do want to take some time to address the accusations of homophobia from the TERFs, and to that I say, unfortunately, I plead guilty. I am very much homophobic. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do better, but I can't make any promises, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But out of all the replies that I saw to my tweet, the last point of contention in particular really proves how dangerous this rhetoric is from Pete Buttigieg. Because, first of all, a liberal being transphobic normalizes transphobia among liberals because they might not trust Trump when he says something Islamophobic or transphobic or homophobic, but if a liberal says it, they're much more receptive to that message. But also, there's this instinct among some liberals to defend everything that Democratic Party politicians say, and that's dangerous because it shields them from constructive criticism and normalizes the incorrect thing that they're saying. Furthermore, I did not take him out of context, and I'm going to show you his full statement because when you get the full context, you'll see that it's actually much, much worse than that headline made it out to be. But without further ado, here's what he said.
Rahm Emanuel, former White House chief of staff and holder of other significant positions as a Democrat, gave an interview to Megyn Kelly just the other day, and she asked a series of questions about trans people. He ended up contradicting most Democratic Party orthodoxy about trans people, ended up by saying, agreeing with the idea that a man cannot become a woman, and then said he was going to head for the witness protection program because he was aware that some Democrats would be unhappy. What's your approach to that, and how would you try to appeal to people who disagree with you about it?
Well, I think the approach starts with compassion. Compassion for transgender people. Compassion for families, especially of young people who are going through this. And also empathy for people who are not sure what all of this means for them, like wondering, wait a minute, I got a daughter in a sports league. Is she going to be competing with boys right now? Right? And just taking everybody seriously. And I think when you do that, that does call into question some of the past orthodoxies in my party, for example, around sports, where I think most reasonable people would recognize that there are serious fairness issues if you just treat this as not mattering when a trans athlete wants to compete in women's sports.
Meaning the parent who's complained about this has a case, in your opinion?
Sure. And that's why I think these decisions should be in the hands of sports leagues and school boards and not politicians, least of all politicians in Washington trying to use this as a political pawn.
When President Trump says something like no boys and girls sports, which is a phrase that they use, it sounds like you're not signing on to that.
I think that chess is different from weightlifting, and weightlifting is different from volleyball, and middle school is different from the Olympics. So that's exactly why I think that we shouldn't be grandstanding on this as politicians. We should be empowering communities and organizations and schools to make the right decisions.
All right, so what happens if a community decides that they do want to discriminate against trans people? What happens if Southern sports leagues decide that they want to resegregate sports again? See, this is why the hands-off approach doesn't work, because if this were the mentality on, say, gay marriage, for example, where if he empowered communities to make these decisions, his marriage wouldn't be legal in most states in the United States. And I think that he would argue that it was good that the Supreme Court decided to step in and prohibit discrimination against same-sex couples. But when it comes to trans people, all of a sudden he, I guess, believes that it's a-okay to allow discrimination to continue if a community thinks it's okay. Now, you can say that that's a straw man, but that's the effect of a hands-off approach that he's advocating for. Like, it's the liberal version of states' rights, but he's like, no, cities' rights instead. Now, the reason why you can't fence it on an issue like this as much as you try, Pete, is because politicians are getting involved. That's a fact. In Kentucky, a school decided that a 13-year-old trans middle schooler, Fisher Wells, could play on the girls' hockey team that she helped to start. Yet Republicans banned her from the sports team that she helped to create. And just to put in perspective how insane this was, they literally passed a law because of the one trans athlete that exists in their entire state. They didn't want that one kid to play on her girls' hockey team, so they created legislation and passed it to stop that one child from playing on her team. So the response to Republicans taking a hands-on approach is not for you to take a hands-off approach, because if you do, you are conceding ground to bigots who don't actually care about fairness in sports. This is a manufactured issue intended to foment hatred against trans people. And the fear-mongering about sports is a Trojan horse for broader dehumanization of trans people. Like, you have to reject the premise entirely. But that's not what Pete Buttigieg did. In fact, he subtly misgendered trans girls, in case you missed it, and he also implied that we should coddle bigoted parents, and he suggested that the Democratic Party was wrong on the issue of transports. And on top of that, he agreed that conservatives who complained about trans students in their schools have a case, when they absolutely do not. Let's put it this way. When it comes to the total number of trans athletes in school sports at the K-12 level, one would think, based on how much Republicans talk about it, that there are thousands and thousands of trans students competing against their cis peers. And so many young girls are getting CTE because these strong trans girls are playing against their cis girls. But in actuality, that's not happening. The total number of trans athletes at the K-12 level across the entire fucking country is 5. You heard that right. 5. That's it. That's it. And usually the only issue are the bigots who make it an issue. It's not because the trans athlete is hurting the cis girls. It's because the bigots don't want a trans kid to be around their kids, because I think that they think transness is contagious. I think it's reasonable to accommodate the 5 trans athletes that exist in the entire country. I don't think that they pose an imminent danger to the cis kids. Call me crazy, but I think that's a little bit unreasonable. Cis students are statistically more likely to get struck by lightning or eaten by a shark or shot by a fucking mass shooter than they are to even encounter a trans athlete. So no, Pete, I don't think that the parents drunk off of Fox News Kool-Aid have a case. I think that they're bullies and we have to stand up to them. And make no mistake about it, Pete Buttigieg, he knows all of this. But he chose to throw trans people, in particular trans youth, under a bus to further his own political ambitions. See, it's gross when any Democratic Party politician does this, but it's especially egregious to see a gay man do it, because the same argument that's being used to dehumanize trans people were just used to dehumanize him like 10 years ago. It's the same fucking playbook, and they didn't even bother to change it at all. In fact, he's old enough to remember the fear-mongering about gay athletes and whether or not it was appropriate to let them in locker rooms with straight athletes, because, you know, what if they couldn't contain their homosexual urges? Did they pose a threat to straight men? But let's not pretend like this is one of those instances where, like, I can convince Pete Buttigieg and he just needs to listen and learn, because he knows what he's doing. He made the choice to be transphobic, and it's deeply, deeply cynical. Everyone, though, can see right through it, thankfully. And to show you what I mean, I want to hear from some TikTokers and what they said in response to Pete Buttigieg's transphobic comments, because needless to say, they were not very happy.
I'm just going to come out and say that I never liked this guy. Not for one goddamn second. You're an absolute piece of shit, Pete. Just a fucking piece of shit. Go fuck yourself. I'm so disgusted and so mad right now. This is just another example of us just moving the line. Just moving the line further and further to the right, so that the right can keep making things worse and worse, because we keep moving the fucking line between us over to their side.
I stand 10 toes down with the trans community. I always have and I always will. But the fact that this keeps getting brought up is ridiculous. I don't care. You know what I do care about, though, is the fact that there are more public photos of Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein than there are trans athletes in the entire NCAA.
All he should have said when they said, "What do you think about transgender people?" I support them, their right to exist, and their need for care unequivocally. Now, could we talk about the economy? Now, could we talk about affordability? Now, could we talk about climate change? Leave trans people alone. Leave queer people alone. Stop bringing a lot of people in my DMs making up excuses for him. He doesn't need excuses.
What the fuck? Are we really just going to make part of our agenda the 15 to 20 people in the United States that happen to be playing sports and how they're dangerous? That's really the vibe that we're bringing to our campaign as an out gay man. Why? Why for years have you done nothing but present yourself as nothing but a disappointment to the gay community? You are nothing but a disappointment. I'm not even gay, but you're a disappointment. As a trans person, it's very concerning to me how, as somebody who's supposed to be part of the LGBTQIA plus community, you are taking your platform to go after people who historically have fought to give you the right to have the platform that you have today. You're literally losing your own community support. For what?
Let's take a look at the advantage of 7-footer plus NBA players and figure out where, is that fair? Is that fair? Because those players across the history of the NBA have had far more advantages at being good at basketball than any trans athletes have shown to have advantages in their sport. There is not compassion in this approach. It is not a compassionate approach. It lacks any understanding. And I have to be quite honest, I don't believe that Pete Buttigieg doesn't understand.
So needless to say, they cooked him, and rightfully so, might I add. But I want to remind you all, this is a smart individual. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how to address this. He should have rejected the premise of the question altogether and echoed the point that that last TikToker made about sports being inherently unfair, but instead he legitimized the right's anti-trans talking point, which is unforgivable in my opinion. But I'll be honest, much like that first guy, I have never liked Pete Buttigieg. He is a neoliberal McKinsey Democrat who hasn't had shit to say about the genocide in Gaza, unless, of course, it was to condemn student protesters. So I've always viewed him as an amoral opportunist who will say whatever he thinks he needs to say to get ahead. But a lot of other queer people, they did look up to him. But he's now losing those people too because of what he said. For example, here's what one former supporter had to say on TikTok about his comments.
I recently had the chance to meet Pete Buttigieg, someone who I had looked up to and respected for his historic leadership as an openly gay politician. And that's why his recent comments about trans girls and women in sports really hit hard. Now, Pete, I want to be clear that trans girls are not boys, and calling us that isn't empathy, it's misgendering and it's harmful, especially coming from you. Now, it's clear that you need some tools and some data, so I want to tell you what it actually says. Testosterone is the only established biological driver of athletic differences between biological sexes, and trans women who suppress testosterone lose any measurable advantage. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports confirms that there's no advantage in elite competition. And fewer than 10 of over 500,000 NCAA athletes in the US are openly trans, and at the Olympic level, way fewer. So this is not a crisis, it's a scapegoat. And let's be honest, this has never been about protecting women's sports. Where was the outrage when women's sports have been underfunded, cut, denied equal facilities and media coverage? The list goes on and on. Most of the people that really push this narrative have never supported women's athletics, and now they're just trying to use it so they can weaponize it against trans people. Worse, invasive genital checks and constant policing of athletes' bodies and of children's bodies will not protect anyone. They'll violate privacy, shame all women and girls, and reinforce harmful ideas that bodies must be inspected to prove their worthiness. These will harm cisgender and transgender athletes alike, and no one should have to face that.
And everything she said there was undeniable, which is all the more reason why you have to reject the premise of their question entirely. But again, this is something that Pete Buttigieg is well aware of. Like, he knows how to respond to that question, but he made the choice to respond in the way that he did. But it's not the first time that we've seen a gay person throw trans people under the bus out of self-preservation in hopes, I guess, that the right-wingers will spare them if they sacrifice their trans siblings to the gods of bigotry. But, like, that's not the way that it works, and even he knows this as well, as dumb as he's pretending to be. If they come for one of us, they're coming for all of us. The issue isn't suddenly going to be settled if you agree with them on trans sports. It's step one of their plan to outlaw trans existence from public life entirely. And once they do that, ask yourself, who's next, Pete? You are. Once they get trans people eradicated from public life, you and your family are next, buddy. But one TikTok about this really stood out to me because it came from a former staffer for his 2020 campaign, which is shocking. But despite that, her commentary here was absolutely scathing.
One of the first people I came out to was actually Chasten Buttigieg, because I started to come to terms with my queerness while working on Pete's presidential campaign in 2020. And my politics have come a long way since 2020. And even before this headline, I never would have supported Pete as a candidate again. But this headline has me so angry, I am literally shaking. Hate to break it to y'all, sports aren't fair, and they never have been. It's not fair that Michael Phelps has a freakish wingspan that makes him a better swimmer. It's not fair that Simone Biles is this big and so she can flip more efficiently. And it's not fair that rich kids can pay their way onto travel teams or pay for private coaching that poor kids will never have access to and therefore cannot compete in the same way. If people want to address a lack of fairness in sports, that wealth gap is the place you should actually be focusing your attention. There will always be athletes with genetic advantages, but that doesn't take away from the work that they have to put in to actually be great. I think it's pretty fucking despicable and also a real canary in the coal mine to what we're up against in the 2026 and 2028 elections, that the most prominent gay member of the Democratic Party is so willing to throw the handful of trans athletes that exist under the bus by feeding into this bigoted and ignorant narrative. For what? Because it's not like the people who care about this were going to vote for his gay ass anyway. Anyway, I'm really ashamed to have ever worked for this man and relieved that everything that happened in 2020 pulled me out of that sunken place.
Wow. Everything she said there, that was perfect. And I'm glad that her politics evolved since then, but unfortunately, if she did do the cringeworthy high hopes dance, then there's just no coming back from that. It's a one-way ticket straight to the gulag. I'm so sorry. No, but on a serious note, her point about this being a canary in the coal mine was really poignant because it shows how far the Democratic Party has fallen on this issue. They already outraged their entire base because of their complicity with Israel's genocide in Gaza, and rather than trying to win those people back, they're going elsewhere for votes, specifically to anti-trans Republican voters because, you know, that strategy worked so well for Kamala, right? And I guess they think it's going to work for them in 2028. But to her point, there's a deeply disgusting trend that's emerging within the Democratic Party where potential 2028 contenders think that they have to pass some sort of right-wing litmus test on trans issues in order to be politically viable. And it is extremely fucking dangerous because, as I said earlier, trans sports is just the starting point. If you give right-wingers an inch, they'll take a mile. And to illustrate this, I'm just going to play a quick compilation of 2028 hopefuls in particular, which shows how far the party has regressed on this issue. It started with trans sports and has already reached the point of its logical conclusion, which is for them to just outright deny trans existence altogether.
He went on to say, quote, "I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that."
The backlash I've received for even raising the issue proves my point, that we have trouble as a party just simply having discussions about these complicated issues. And we need to. We need to, whether we want to or not, because they were influential in the election. And the election proved that Democrats are just out of touch with the majority of Americans.
So like you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports, right. that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out and say no.
No, and I appreciate. But
like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. For moving the humanity, right versus wrong, the morality on either side, politically, it is a major problem for the Democratic Party.
What about for your values? I mean, is 8 years old too young?
Yeah, I mean, look, I now that I have a 9-year-old, just became 9. Come on, man. I get it. So those are legit. The trans issue for me is also novel. It's over the last few years. I'm trying to understand as much as anyone else. Whole pronoun thing, trying to understand all of that. Well, that was like the hell. I mean, all that stuff. I get it. And this notion of gender affirming care for children, that's tough, man. And the science on that, I haven't dove that deep into it, but I read one report and then there's one that's slightly contradictory. And then they said, there's no contradictory. Here's what the UK just came out with. You're full of shit. It's absolutely scientifically sound that it's outrageous, and so it's intense. And then I meet with families, literally meet with families, save my child's life, and they're thriving.
It's just, you can't serve the country until you're 18. You can't buy a gun. You can't get alcohol until you're 21. And to make that big of a decision as a kid, you could also be destroying a lot of lives as well. Their brain isn't even fully developed.
You got, until 26 plus. Yeah. So it's even further with the brain. Look, I come to this very much more open-minded than I've ever been, more receptive.
Should we be putting men in female prisons? Men claiming they're women?
No.
And, all right, here's my last one for you. Can a man become a woman?
Can a man become a woman? No.
Thank you.
So, as I was saying, it starts with sports and then it ends in the full dehumanization of trans people because conservatives use the trans sports non-issue as an entry point, with their ultimate goal being to expand the boundaries of anti-trans discourse once you buy into their premise on trans sports. Now, I'm not sure if you caught it or not, but Gavin Newsom, he made a quick caveat before switching points, and he said removing the humanity, which was interesting to me because that is exactly, unironically, what he's doing in that interview. And much like Pete Buttigieg, he knows what he's saying. He knows what it means to be an 8-year-old who is trans. It means they get to wear new clothes. It means perhaps they use a new name and different pronouns. Like, what's the alternative to that? Beating their ass? Take out that dress, boy, I'm gonna get the bill. Like, what do you want parents to do if their child starts saying, actually, no, I'm a girl, not a boy, and I want to wear girls' clothing? Like, you're essentially arguing for bullying children if you're against gender-affirming care for trans youth, which is what happened to me as a kid, by the way. I was bullied by adults, essentially. I remember grown-ups telling me that I was acting like a sissy and a queer because at times I was a little bit too effeminate or wanted to play with Barbies. But since then, since I was a kid, thankfully, society has evolved and realized that it's actually kind of gross to tell kids that they have to act a certain way because society wouldn't like if they're being a little bit too effeminate. It's gross to tell kids that they can't be who they are, right? Like, I feel like we all agreed on that. But according to Gavin Newsom, him being open to a pro-child abuse stance, which is effectively what he's arguing for, it makes him more open-minded than ever on this issue. Like, he's bragging about being open-minded when in actuality, he's only being open-minded to the most closed-minded people in the country, in particular, religious zealots who'd send all kids to conversion camps if they deviated a little bit too much from gender norms that were ascribed to them before they were even fucking born. But I want to stress that these are just Democrats who've gone on the record. Earlier this year, when I was at a town hall for Oregon Senator Ron Wyden, a constituent asked him about protecting gender-affirming healthcare for trans youth, which is life-saving and medically necessary, by the way, and he dodged the question. He just did not answer the question, was waffling back and forth, gave a non-answer. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's against it, but it indicates that Democrats are very clearly regressing on this issue because they're no longer unequivocally in support of the LGBTQ plus community. And that didn't just start this year, because last year, Democratic Party candidates like Colin Allred, as well as others, they also threw trans people under a bus, so that way they can win their campaigns. It didn't help, but they thought that it could, so under the bus, trans people went. And we've reached a point, sadly, where you can't automatically assume that Democrats are good on this issue just because they have a D next to their name, because that's unfortunately just objectively no longer the case. Thankfully, there are people who are standing strong for trans people, like Andy Bashir, Tim Walz, and J.B. Pritzker, other 2028 hopefuls, but just don't ask those individuals about their stance on Gaza, because they'll sorely disappoint you on that issue as well. Not to say that like Gavin Newsom and Pete Buttigieg are good on that issue, but there's just like something about Democrats that is deeply flawed, even if they're good overall, and that's a huge problem. But in conclusion, we deserve to have Democrats who are good on all of the issues that the base cares about. And as voters, I think we need to be very clear, especially now, that if they equivocate at all, we will crush their presidential ambitions in 2028. Now, look, you can call that a purity test. I'm fine with that. But I call it having standards, like basic standards, not being a shitty person. And it's incumbent on all of us to raise the bar so that way they know what our expectations are before 2028. Like, we're not going to tolerate more mealy-mouthed right-wing bullshit from Democrats being anti-trans, anti-Palestinian, anti-immigrant, anti-Medicare for all in any way, shape, or form is a non-starter. And they can either fall in line or get kicked to the fucking curb. I'm so done with this bullshit. Individuals like Pete Buttigieg, like saying something like that, it should be career ending. And the fact that it's not, well, that just tells us that we have to make it so that is indeed the case.
Mom, I'm gay. Gays. Gays. Mom, I'm transgender.